That Was No Lady is the 14th episode of the first season of The Golden Girls. This is directed by Jim Drake, and this episode focuses on Dorothy, so I had a feeling I was going to really enjoy this. And I did. I didn't think it was as funny as some of the other episodes. There are some great lines in it. One that I'm surprised they kept in, actually, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. We also get a mention of Debbie Reynolds, which I absolutely love. So there were some really good moments, some slightly awkward moments. It might not have been the funniest, but I think it was definitely a thought-provoking episode, and as far as Dorothy goes, a really enjoyable episode for her character. So there will be spoilers from now, as I talk about a few things that happen in the episode, and mention some highlights and some thoughts that I had along the way. We have a subplot involving Blanche and her car. She's getting rid of her car, and Rose, initially reluctantly, agrees to try out the car for 2 weeks, and if she likes it, she'll consider buying it from Blanche. And the way that part of the episode developed, we only get a little bit every now and then, and it worked quite well. Blanche felt a little guilty because she was actually really trying to cheat Rose out of her money because the car wasn't up for very much. But ultimately, the car gets stolen, which is not the direction I thought it was going in. And Blanche gets the insurance money and buys a new car. And I thought that was a pretty decent way to wrap up that part of the narrative. The rest of it focuses on Dorothy, and she's going out with somebody called Glen. She works with him, and things are going really well to begin with. And then she finds out something about him that really puts a spanner in the works. But before we get to that reveal, we also have a quote that, as I said, I'm surprised was in this. And the quote is from Sophia, and I quote, "You've been hit by more lightning than the World Trade Center." And I kind of did a double take because I thought, hang on, have they really kept that in? On the one hand, I don't think there is this need to remove mentions of the World Trade Center from popular culture. But when that quote is referring to the World Trade Center being hit, granted it's by lightning, I did think maybe they could have done something to remove that. I googled it, and apparently some stations did remove it when they broadcast this episode. I'm surprised Disney Plus didn't, because they're usually pretty quick at removing sensitive references. I'm thinking of The Simpsons. So that took me by surprise, put it that way. Obviously, not the show's fault, not the episode's fault. It's a product of its time, but I just wasn't expecting that. Moving on, Dorothy finds out that Glen is actually married. Not a happy marriage. I mean, let's face it, if you're cheating, it's probably not going to be a happy marriage. And Dorothy doesn't know what to do, because she doesn't know if she should leave him or stay with him, and she decides to no longer see him, but then she becomes really unhappy, and she's torn between doing the right thing morally but being miserable, or doing the wrong thing but being in maybe a happy relationship's not the right term, but at least having a good time with Glen. And she definitely has a lot of conflicting emotions here, and I think what's really interesting is that nobody else, Blanche, Sophia, Rose, nobody else thinks that she should go back to him. And I think she knows that that would be the right thing to do, but she doesn't want to give up this happy feeling. And actually, I thought at the very beginning when we see her with Glen, before we find out the truth, I did have the thought that this is probably the happiest I've ever seen Dorothy as a character. And then we find out the reality of the situation, and it was kind of difficult to deal with because she is my favourite character, and I don't want to see her unhappy. But at the same time, I don't want to see her making bad decisions either. And I think ultimately she made the right decision. And we also have this really interesting scene. It's very brief, actually, but Rose and Blanche are sitting around a table, and Rose is not happy with Dorothy. It's not just that she's trying to get her to do the right thing. She's actually pretty disgusted that Dorothy would even be considering having an affair with a married man. And Dorothy says, "You don't understand, you've never been in this situation, at least Blanche can relate." And Blanche reveals that actually she's never been with a married man. And I thought that was a really nice bit of, not so much character development, but a reveal of something about the character, because Blanche does come across as somebody who's a little too fast and loose with male encounters. But by saying that actually she does draw the line at something that's immoral, I thought that was actually a really nice thing to include there for her character. And to have Dorothy being the one making the bad decisions is unusual and very thought-provoking. And I think they handled everything in a way that's very believable, very realistic. And I think there are some good messages in here for anybody who is in a similar situation. And before I wrap up, as I said, we got a mention of Debbie Reynolds, which I absolutely loved. Rose is talking about how various celebrities and famous people had their relationships ruined because of certain attitudes. And she said, and I quote, "It's the same attitude that broke up Debbie and Eddie." She then named several others, including Eddie and Liz, meaning Eddie Fisher and Liz Taylor, and a couple of others, a couple that I didn't get the reference to. And this one, if you didn't know Debbie and Eddie, you wouldn't make the connection as Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher, but being a huge Debbie Reynolds fan, completely in love with her, that reference just made me a little happy. Blink and you miss it, but it made me smile. So it's a really good episode, definitely not as laugh out loud funny as some of the episodes, but that's not necessarily a problem. I still thought it was really brilliant, very, very well done, and one that I think is a great look at Dorothy, because she doesn't get that many chances at happiness, and when she does, well, things don't necessarily go according to her plans. But it's a great episode. Slightly awkward reference to the World Trade Center that, as I said, I am surprised Disney Plus kept it in. I'm not necessarily saying they should have removed it, but based on other times they remove it or they censor various things, I'm just surprised that they didn't on this occasion. This is, of course, Disney Plus in the UK. Maybe they removed it from American Disney Plus. If anybody can confirm that, please feel free to let me know. But either way, the episode is good. Not as funny as some others, but That Was No Lady is still a decent watch.